This happened during Christmas of 2019, and I haven't celebrated the holiday the same way since. Some of you might think I'm crazy for believing what I saw, but I know what happened in that cabin, and I know what followed me home. I'm 34 now, but I was 28 at the time, working as a translator for a publishing company in Oslo. That December, my grandmother passed away unexpectedly, a heart attack in her sleep, and left me her property in rural Norway. A small cabin about 3 hours north of Trondheim, surrounded by dense pine forest, and accessible only by a single dirt road that became nearly impassable in winter. I'd visited as a child during summer holidays, but hadn't been back in over 15 years. My mother told me to wait until spring to handle the estate, but I had 2 weeks off for Christmas and decided to spend them there, sorting through her belongings. The thought of spending the holidays alone didn't bother me. I'd just gone through a difficult divorce and needed the solitude. The drive up was beautiful. Fresh snow blanketed everything, and the roads were empty once I left the main highway. The cabin looked exactly as I remembered it, a traditional red-painted wooden structure with a steep roof to shed snow. The first few days were peaceful. The cabin had no internet and spotty cell reception, but it had electricity, a wood-burning stove, and enough canned food to last a month. I spent my time going through old photographs, boxing up antiques, and taking long walks through the snow-covered woods. The silence was absolute. No cars, no voices, just the occasional cry of a raven overhead. My grandmother had been deeply traditional, some would say superstitious, and I found strange things as I cleaned. Bundles of dried herbs tied with red thread above every doorway, salt lines along the windowsills, a wooden figure carved with symbols I didn't recognize, nailed above the front entrance. I photographed them to show my mother later. On the 12th night after Christmas, I found her journal hidden in a drawer in the bedroom. Most of it was mundane, notes about weather, visitors, recipes, but the final entries, written in a shaking hand, made my stomach turn. She wrote about something called Den 13. Natten, the 13th night. According to old Norwegian folklore, this was when the veil between worlds was thinnest, when things that had been watching all winter would finally make themselves known. She described rituals for protection, keeping all lights burning through the night, never opening the door after sundown, leaving offerings of porridge and bread outside. She wrote about hearing footsteps in the snow when no one was there, about shadows that moved against the direction of the wind. The last entry, dated just 3 days before she died, simply read, "It has found the cabin. I pray the old ways hold. Forgive me for what I could not tell you." I told myself it was the ramblings of an elderly woman losing her grip on reality. I wish I could still believe that. That night, the 13th night, I woke around 2:15 a.m. to the sound of footsteps on the porch. They were slow, deliberate, circling the cabin. I lay frozen in bed, listening. The fire had burned low, and cold was creeping in. The footsteps stopped directly outside my bedroom window. I could hear breathing. Deep, rattling breaths that fogged the glass from the outside. I watched condensation form in shapes that looked almost like handprints pressing inward. Then a voice, speaking Norwegian in a dialect so old I could barely understand it. "Let me in, child. I've walked so far through the snow. Let me warm myself by your fire." Every instinct screamed at me to stay silent. My phone was on the nightstand. I reached for it slowly, but then I heard something that made my blood freeze solid. It spoke in my grandmother's voice, perfectly replicated. The exact cadence. "Open the door, dear. It's so cold out here. Don't you recognize me? I've missed you so much." I grabbed my phone and called the emergency line, whispering frantically. The dispatcher agreed to send someone, though she warned me it would take at least 40 minutes given the road conditions. The footsteps resumed, circling again, faster now. I heard scratching at the door, long, deliberate scrapes, like nails dragging down wood. Then a laugh. Not my grandmother's laugh. Something ancient and hungry, wearing her voice like a mask. Then silence. Complete, oppressive silence that felt worse than the sounds. When the police arrived nearly an hour later, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, I was still standing in the cabin with a knife in my hand. They found tracks in the snow circling the cabin, but they weren't human footprints. too long, too narrow, with only 3 distinct toes. One officer, an older man who'd clearly lived in the region his whole life, quietly pulled me aside before leaving. "Did you open the door?" "No," he nodded slowly. "Good. Don't. Not on this night. Not ever on this night. Your grandmother knew. That's why she survived out here so long. I sold the cabin that spring without ever spending another night there. But sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment in the dead of winter, I hear those footsteps outside my door, and a voice, my grandmother's voice, asking to be let in, telling me she forgives me for selling her home. I never do." This happened in February 2021, during that brutal polar vortex that knocked out power across the Midwest. I was 23, living alone in a rental house on the outskirts of a small town in northern Wisconsin, the kind of place where your nearest neighbor is a quarter mile away, through dense woods, and the silence at night is so complete, you can hear your own heartbeat. I'd grown up in the area and knew how to handle winter isolation. My father had taught me well before he passed. I had a backup generator, plenty of firewood stacked on the porch, a pantry full of canned goods, and a 12-gauge shotgun I kept for coyotes that sometimes came too close to the property. When the storm hit and the power went out, I wasn't worried. I figured I'd ride it out for a few days, like I had before. The first 2 nights were uneventful. I spent my time reading by candlelight, keeping the fire going, and listening to the wind howl against the windows. The snow piled up past the lower panes. My phone had no signal. The cell tower must have gone down, so I turned it off to save battery for emergencies. By the 3rd night, I estimated there were nearly 4 feet of snow on the ground, with drifts even higher against the north side of the house. That's when I started hearing the knocking. It came from the back door, around 11 p.m. 3 slow knocks, evenly spaced. I assumed it was a branch or debris from the storm, but when I looked out the window, flashlight in hand, I saw nothing. The snow around the back porch was undisturbed, pristine. No footprints, no fallen branches, just endless white stretching into darkness. The knocking came again, an hour later. Then again, at 1 a.m. Always 3 knocks. Always from the back door. Always when I had just started to relax. My grandmother used to tell me stories about the Wendigo, a creature from Algonquin folklore that roamed the northern woods in winter, born from hunger and isolation. She said it had once been human, driven to cannibalism during a brutal winter long ago, and now wandered eternally, cursed and starving. She said it could mimic voices, calling out to travelers in the voices of their loved ones, leading them into the forest to freeze to death. I'd always dismissed it as a campfire story meant to scare children into staying close to home. That night, the knocking stopped around 2 a.m. The fire had burned low. I was debating whether to add more wood when I heard something that stopped me cold. My father's voice, coming from outside. "Hey, open up. Car broke down on the road. Need to warm up. It's freezing out here, buddy." My father had been dead for 6 years. Pancreatic cancer took him fast. I grabbed my shotgun and pressed myself against the wall next to the door, heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The voice came again, this time from the side of the house, moving. "Come on, son. It's me. It's really me. Don't make me beg. I'm so cold." I didn't respond. I could hear footsteps now, crunching in the snow outside, circling the house. Whatever was out there moved slowly, deliberately, stopping at each window. I kept all the lights off, barely breathing, the shotgun slick with sweat in my hands. Then it found the front door. The knocking started again. But this time, it was different. Something was testing the door, pushing against it, trying the handle. The old wood groaned. I heard a low, guttural sound, something between a growl and a laugh. "I know you're in there. I can smell the fire. I can smell you, boy. I'm so hungry. It's been such a long winter." The voice wasn't my father's anymore. It was wrong, too deep, too wet, like something speaking through a throat full of fluid. I aimed my shotgun at the door and shouted, "I'm armed. I will shoot through this door." Silence. 1 second. 5, 10, then footsteps retreating. Slow at first, then faster, moving toward the tree line. I waited by that door until dawn, never lowering my weapon. When the sun finally came up, I went outside. There were tracks leading from the tree line to my house and back. But they weren't footprints, not really. They looked almost human, but elongated, with deep claw marks at the toes. The stride was impossibly long, 8, maybe 10 feet between prints. I moved out that spring and haven't been back to Wisconsin since. But sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd opened that door, if I'd believed it was really my father. Some things in the winter woods are real, and they're always hungry. This happened 7 years ago, and I've never told anyone the full story until now. I was 19, spending Hogmanay, that's New Year's Eve in Scotland, at my great-aunt's farmhouse in the Scottish Highlands. She was the last of our family to still live in the old country, and I'd promised my mother I'd visit her before she passed. My mum couldn't make the trip herself due to health issues, so I went alone. My great-aunt Margaret was 91, sharp as a tack, and deeply rooted in old Highland traditions that most people had forgotten. She lived alone in a stone farmhouse that had been in our family for over 200 years, surrounded by nothing but moorland and mountains. The nearest village was 8 miles away along a single-track road, and in winter, when the roads iced over, she was completely isolated for weeks at a time. I arrived on December 30th after a long train ride from Edinburgh. The farmhouse was beautiful in a stark, ancient way. Gray stone walls, 2 feet thick, small windows to keep out the cold. Margaret met me at the door with strong tea and shortbread, and for the first hour, everything felt normal. But there was a nervousness in her eyes. She kept glancing at the windows. That night, as we ate dinner by the fire, a thick lamb stew she'd made from scratch, she asked me a strange question. "You haven't made any promises this year, have you, lass? Sworn any oaths you haven't kept?" I laughed, confused. "What do you mean?" She didn't smile. Her weathered hands gripped her teacup. In the old days, Hogmanay wasn't just about celebration. It was about settling debts before the new year, making things right. If you carried broken promises into the new year, she trailed off, staring at the fire. There are things that collect on those debts, things that remember when we forget. On New Year's Eve, Margaret performed rituals I'd never seen. She woke before dawn and cleaned the entire house with water she'd collected from a spring. She burned juniper branches in every room until the air was thick with fragrant smoke. She scattered ashes from the fireplace across every threshold. When I asked why, she simply said, "To keep out what shouldn't enter. The old ways have power, child." At 11:45 p.m., the power went out. Margaret didn't seem surprised. She immediately lit candles and instructed me to stay away from the windows. "Hush, child, don't speak, don't look outside. And whatever you hear, whatever you think you hear, don't respond." But I did look. I couldn't help it. Through the window, I saw a figure standing at the stone wall that marked the edge of the property. It was impossibly tall, at least 7 feet, wrapped in what looked like tattered rags that moved even though there was no wind. Its face was pale, almost luminescent in the darkness. I couldn't see its eyes, but I could feel them. Watching. It wasn't moving. Just standing there, staring at the house. I must have made a sound, because Margaret grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "You looked. God help us. You looked at it." The figure began walking toward the house. Not fast, but steady, inevitable. With each step, the candles flickered, even though there was no draft. Margaret pulled me into the cellar and barred the heavy wooden door behind us. The cellar was ancient, carved into bedrock, cold and dark. Above, I heard the front door open. Margaret had never locked it. She told me, "You never locked your door on Hogmanay, in case benevolent spirits needed shelter." But whatever entered wasn't benevolent. Footsteps moved through the house. Slow, deliberate. I heard furniture being overturned. Then, the footsteps stopped directly above the cellar. A voice called down my voice. My exact voice. "Auntie Margaret, where are you?" I'm scared. Please let me in. Margaret grabbed my hand so hard I felt her bones through her papery skin. Her lips moved in silent prayer. The voice called again and again. It knew my name. It knew Margaret's name. It asked about promises I'd made to visit more often. About the lie I'd told when I said I'd help Margaret move to Edinburgh. You promised, lass. You promised and you forgot. Now someone has to pay. Eventually, church bells began to ring. Midnight. The new year. The presence above us let out a sound I'll never forget. A shriek of frustration, of hunger denied. The walls shook with it. Then the footsteps retreated. The front door slammed. We didn't leave the cellar until dawn. The house was in disarray, but nothing was taken. At the front door, we found a small doll made of straw and black cloth. It had no face. Margaret burned it without a word. She passed away 3 months later. I inherited the farmhouse but have never returned. Every hogmanay now. I make sure my conscience is clear. My promises kept. My doors locked. Because something is still waiting out there in that Highland darkness. Waiting to collect.